Good day, everyone. I'm Steve Casey from mBLAST, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, which is on the topic of social intelligence, from strategy to influencer identification and engagement. Just a quick housekeeping item before we start. We have lots of great content for you today. We'll do our best to get to Q&A at the back end of the presentation, but we'd encourage you to participate in the conversation we'll be having live on Twitter. You can see the hashtag on the screen at mBLASTLive. Feel free to post your questions and comments there. We'll respond as we can during the presentation, and our presenters will also be hanging around for a little chat post-presentation once we're done. And okay, having a little issue with advancing the slide. Okay, hold on one second. Yep, okay, slight delay there. Hopefully that doesn't persist. Okay, we're very excited to have as one of our presenters today Zach Reese-Davis. Zach's an analyst at Forrester. He works in the Marketing Leadership Professionals practice. Zach is an expert on the use of social media to improve the performance of your sales and marketing organizations. He's been frequently writing about and talking with his clients about how to help them reach new customers and how to use social media to build stronger communities. Prior to his role as an analyst with Forrester, Zach was a researcher in the firm's technology marketing team. He also has a degree from Brown University, which he received in public policy with a focus on emerging technologies. We also have with us today Mark Hatch. Mark is the CEO of mBLAST. Prior to that role, he was also the CTO, so he's the architect of the company's solutions, knows them inside and out. Mark has more than 20 years industry experience in the software engineering and high-tech management roles. He's worked at industry leaders and startups, including companies such as Carbonite, ICC, and OneCore Financial. So with that, I will hand it over to Zach, and let me change the presenter to Zach.
And as that happens,
here we go.
Thank you all very much for your time today, and I want to thank mBLAST for having me today. Most notably, you can definitely find the whole conversation on Twitter at mBLASTLive, or you can find me at ZacharyRD. We're going to be talking today first off about how is the social marketing technology value chain and how is social impacting each part of the customer lifecycle, and then where does social listening fit as a part of that discussion. And then third, what is influencer marketing and how does it relate to social listening? And then last, we're going to talk about how to identify and work with influencers, and then we're going to hear a bit about how that fits with the mBLAST solution directly from the mBLAST team. So when we start out, we really need to step back before I get into anything related to social at all and look at a customer lifecycle model. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these models over time, but this is the one that Forrester's really been working with because it really takes away from we're shoveling leads in at the top and we're getting business out at the bottom, and instead saying customers have their own goals and their own processes they go through a customer lifecycle, starting with discovering your solutions, then exploring if they're the right fit for their needs, making a purchase, and engaging with your brand after the purchase. And that's the framework we're going to be thinking about everything in today. And really when we talk about influencer marketing, we're really talking about that discovery stage where people are going to be relying on their influencers, their peers, to give them information about new solutions to consider that they wouldn't have otherwise found on their own. And we know this from survey data. When we ask people, how do you discover new brands and new products you wouldn't have otherwise found, their top answer is their friends and family, and after that it's online search and TV ads. So some traditional sources and also people who are influential online and sharing their opinion. If I ask this question in a B2B context, I get an even more strong answer where peers and colleagues are right at the top. And also on this list near the top, you'll see industry analysts, you'll see salespeople, you'll see people sources. What you won't see at the top, in fact, you'll see all the way at the bottom, are Twitter and Facebook in a B2B context. And the reason for that is people aren't going to those public social networks to discover things and to learn about new solutions. Instead, they're saying, who has the information that matters to me and what conversations can I have with them wherever they're having that discussion? So when we talk about the discovery stage of the customer lifecycle and talk about the reach channels that are used, we're cutting across different types of digital and traditional channels. And we're saying we need to include traditional channels like TV, print, radio, but we're also going to need to include viral content and word-of-mouth marketing that will help our audience move to where they're actually exploring if our solutions are a fit for them. So we're going to do that by adding social reach tools and discovery, but we're also, and somewhat outside the scope of what we're going to be talking about today, using social depth tools to help people explore and buy, and social relationship tools to help them engage after the purchase. And one thing I really want you to take away from this section is that you cannot say, I'm going to have a Facebook page or a Twitter page and have people use that to discover your solutions. It just won't work. You need to engage with people that they're already having conversations with during discovery. They're not coming to your Facebook page, your Twitter page, and that's why we need social reach and influencer and word-of-mouth marketing. You'll note I haven't really talked about social listening yet today. And the reason for that is social listening is something you do to inform the rest of this discussion. When we look at the different elements of social marketing, you're going to start out by saying, how do I plan my marketing mix? Then I'm going to say, how do I reach new audiences through social? Then how do I add social to my site? And then how do I engage in public social networks? So step one is using social listening to plan what is the right thing to do, what conversations are happening about my brand, how is my brand being mentioned on public social channels. And then I want to be using social reach to aid discovery, social depth to add social elements to my own site and aid exploration, social relationship platforms to help people after they've purchased become tighter aligned with your brand. And I'll note that I have measurement off on the side here, not because it's not important, but because measurement is a lot deeper than counting statistics or kind of counting clicks and votes. It's really getting to kind of core brand value and revenue. And so far, it tends to not be directly encompassed in any of these tools. So what are we doing with social listening before we get into influencer marketing? Social listening is going to help us learn about what our audience is doing, what our audience needs, and they'll help us actually build our social strategies. You'll note they're not focused on engagement. They're not focused on building two-way conversations. Some social listening tools have elements of that involved, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is what are people saying about my brand and how can I use that to inform my strategy later on. And you can see that just looking at a dashboard, much like mBLAST, our host for the day, where you get a lot of really valuable insights out of this dashboard, but their dashboard isn't going to directly get me to having conversations with either influencers for discovery or customers later on in the customer lifecycle. And you'll see that also when I actually try to look at what marketers are doing on listening platforms. When we ask marketers, why do you use a listening platform? What do you do in your listening platform today? 71% say market research. 2/3 say brand tracking. But really, influencer marketing, which is central for discovery, is only being used by 40%. And lead gen is only being used by 9%. And this isn't that startling because, again, they're great at brand tracking, market research, and they're not really designed for the other parts of this discussion. So, actually, and I'll add one more piece here. Keep in mind from the previous slides that also listening platforms help you get a gestalt of what's going on public social networks, but those conversations are often really a pointer and an indicator to conversations going on in other places. And so we need to be thinking, well, if our content is on a public social network like Twitter, but our influencers or customers are being influenced and discovering us on blogs, niche forums, individual discussions, I have a disconnect there that is going to have me feed information from my listening and social intelligence platforms into other parts of my marketing mix. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So if we talk about that reach piece on its own, we need to talk about discovery and new prospects who don't already know about us at all. And you'll note another thing I haven't said today is anything about paid versus free, earned, owned, and paid, earned, owned, because it's not really the right way of thinking about this. Paid, earned, and owned, or paid versus free, gets us to some false dichotomies that just don't help me when I'm trying to figure out how my customers or prospects are going to discover me, because everything's a mix of both. You can put paid advertising dollars behind any piece of content. You can work with influencers in both a free and organic or a paid fashion. Instead, it's all a mix of both. Instead, when you're talking about social reach, and also where is the role of influencer marketing going to fit in this, you need to be talking about how much your prospects are going to trust the content you're creating and how well targeted it's going to be. Where the most trusted content for discovery is being created by category influencers completely on their own. But that content is really hard to control. Those people creating that content are entirely independent from your brand, and you don't really have the ability to directly impact what they're saying in the top right. On the other hand, you can work with your customers and advocates who are much more going to say things positive about your brand. We can do advocate marketing. We can figure out who those top advocates are and get them to write about us. And people are going to trust that content as well, but slightly less so than working with influencers. And then third, we can work with our employees, our channel partners, and our resellers who are certainly in business with us, but often have an independent voice and an independent story to tell about our brand that can be really powerful for discovery. And then finally, our own marketing team can create content as well, whereas we can say, look, as marketers, we're going to actually be able to target exactly who we want to reach with our discovery content. But we know that those ads, those commissioned content may be less impactful than organically generated content or really highly trusted content from employees, from customers, or from influencers. So we're going to be spending a lot of time thinking about those influencers specifically, but I want to build out this idea a little bit further about what is social reach. Well, influencer marketing takes the idea of the person who is generating this content may or may not like you. If I am a big oil company, Becky Bond of Credo is the executive director and spokesperson for an anti-Keystone Pipeline advocacy group. Well, she is certainly an influencer. She certainly matters to the big oil company. But she also certainly doesn't actually like the big oil company. We need to treat her as an influencer, as someone whose voice is impactful and can change the conversations. But she's certainly not an advocate, and she's certainly not, or she might be a customer because it's big oil, but not necessarily. Then at the other end, we want to talk about advocate marketing, someone like Senator Hoeven, who is clearly doing business with you, is clearly working with you, and I obviously do mean this a little bit sarcastically, but it's a fun example nonetheless. And we want to say, how can he be a part of our marketing mix separately from an influencer, because we're much more confident in what he's going to say. And then finally, we want to supplement any type of social reach with social advertising to help share our message with the exact right people that we need to reach at any given time. So looking at this influencer marketing piece very specifically, we're going to be saying, who's more influential, and how do we actually figure out who we want to listen to in the first or work with in the first place? Influencer marketing is not something where I can say, what is your single score? What is your single number tattooed on your forehead that gets you to say, this person's more influential than that person? One example is if I take Warren Buffett on the left and Joe Sixpack, the quintessential everyman, on the right, and ask you who is more influential. The answer is we have absolutely no idea. Because in the context of financial planning and financial advice, Warren Buffett is clearly one of the most influential people in the entire world, and he should be. If I am running a brokerage firm, if I'm running a retirement firm, I would love to have Warren Buffett say something about my firm. It would drive lots of business. On the other hand, I threw a ringer in here. Joe Sixpack is actually a beer blogger and beer columnist for some both print media and a series of blogs, and he lives in Philly. If I actually want to talk about microbrewing and new distilleries, and I want to talk about the beer, all sorts of awesome new beers and beer festivals, Joe Sixpack is much more influential than Warren Buffett. Because if I wanted advice on beer, I certainly wouldn't go to Warren Buffett. I would go to Joe Sixpack. The reason we're spending time on this is because it gets to the question of every influential person and every influencer is highly contextual. This is all about who matters for your brand. And every single person on this call right now is going to have a very different list of influencers that matter to them. And actually identifying who are these people I want to pay attention to is actually a very important first step to actually working with them and actually crafting an influencer marketing program. And even once I do that, I can't treat each of these people as the same, much like I don't treat all of my customers as the same. Some people who have a little bit of influence about your space, and some people are massively important, and whatever they say is going to drive the market and drive people adopt my products. And I need to, as I build out influencer marketing campaigns, focus on the influencers who really matter to my brand and who are really telling a story that makes a difference to how people discover me. So why should I do this? Why is this important, and why do I need to be doing influencer marketing? Well, to step one, this is not something where if I don't do it, no conversations happen. Your influencers are going to be talking about this space every day, whether or not you're involved. That's what they do. It's why they're influential. And so engagement with them actually fuels the fire and fosters better conversations and richer interactions. It doesn't magically create conversation where there was none already. And then third, influencing these influencers can change the tone of the conversation. Someone who's working with your brand may be more inclined to say positive things, or may just be more inclined to say the types of things you're interested in. Maybe thinking about the space or market in a new way because of the conversations they've had with you, and that new way of thinking will get across to their customers and to the readers of their content. And that's really important to your brand. So let me give you a couple of quick examples of this. First off, we have Penny Arcade. For those of you who don't know Penny Arcade, it's a quite influential online comic strip and a quite influential gaming expo. He runs a gaming expo. He runs a comic, web comic about computer games. And he made an aside comment about the Microsoft Surface Pro that the Microsoft marketing team picked up on and said, you know what, this guy is not a traditional influencer. He's not a member of the traditional press. He's not an industry analyst. But he has a large and loyal following who care about his opinion about digital devices and how to use them for games. And so they said, let's work with the person who runs Penny Arcade, Gabe, and help him learn more about the Microsoft Surface Pro. And in the end, he actually wrote an in-depth review of the device on his website that was picked up by quite a number of sites, including TechMeme, and got very wide reach because Microsoft was willing to broaden what they thought of as a traditional influencer to include a whole new category of people and a whole new method of engagement that were the people who really mattered to their brand. Next, I'm going to look at Radisson. Radisson's obviously not necessarily the sexiest hotel chain going, and they really wanted to increase people's awareness and increase people's discovery of Radisson as a fun place to stay. So what they did is they put together a list of 50 of the top influencers on travel and hotel stays and offered each of them a free hotel night. Now, that doesn't sound very good because giving away a free hotel night, well, we really don't want to lead with giveaways when we do influencer marketing because it creates the wrong incentive structure, and frankly, it just creates a pay-for-play environment that is not healthy for anyone and also lessens trust. What Radisson realized was much smarter is they said to these 50 influencers, so mainly travel blogs, that you must then give away this night to your fans, to your audience, in whatever way you would like. And most of them actually ran an online contest to give away the night. For example, write an essay in the comment section about why this hotel stay should go to you. Write something saying this is a great fit for me because, and then syndicate it to the audience's social networks. And this was really powerful for them because they managed to get lots and lots of people talking about their brand in ways they wouldn't have otherwise. And it worked great for the influencers because the influencers got a piece of free content that everyone wanted to share and everyone wanted to talk about. And the brand loved it because everyone, again, was talking about something that realistically was a very inexpensive, very minor marketing effort. Remember, all they did was line up 50 influencers who are willing to opt into this and offer them a voucher for probably $200 each. This is a very cheap way of marketing, and something that we really need to remember as we do this is it's not a huge investment to get started experimenting with how influencer marketing can work for your brand, whether or not you're a B2B brand, a B2C brand, large or small. So that's really all I'm going to be doing in this part of the prepared content. I'm going to turn it back over to the mBLAST team in a moment. But again, I will be taking questions both after the mBLAST content out loud, but also on Twitter at #mBLASTlive and also at ZacharyRD. And with that, if you want to take the control back, we will continue on with the mBLAST content.
Okay. Okay, here we are. I'm going to slideshow mode, and over to you, Mark.
Great. I had to remember to unmute myself, as you know, from meetings. So that's always, I always mute myself to give everybody else a chance. Hey there, I'm Mark Hatch, and I'm the CEO of mBLAST, as they told you, and I'll be picking up on some of the themes that were brought up by Zach. And sort of talking about them a little bit more as they relate to some of the work that we've been doing on this side of the house. So for us, what you see here is social intelligence really is what we're talking about. And that covers the gamut of things from strategy all the way up into engagement. So one of the big things, or the couple of the big themes that you should be thinking about while I'm going through all my slides are, one, and Zach said this is different channels. So whenever you're thinking about social intelligence, social listening, anything of that nature, many people choose to sort of narrow their focus when they hear the word social and they think of the usual suspects. I don't want you to think that way at all. Social covers everything. It covers blogs, it covers articles, it covers discussion forums, it covers everything. So please be aware that that's one overarching influence that, that Zach brought up, and you should let that go through here. And the second part of this is topic and theme and subject matter is everything, right? Context is king here, so keep thinking of that. So really what we're looking here is we have these platforms that are coming out now for social listening, and that by listen, I think there's a really big distinction to be made here. People talk about engagement, but one of the real truisms that I think is there's an entire huge difference between engagement and reaction. So when I say social listening, what I'm really referring to is active listening research type mode. You're looking at all of these things. You're not reacting to them. You're looking across all of this to find out what's being said in the way that the subject matter is approached and who's doing it. In all of this, you see social depth, social relationship, all of this really goes together because in the end, what you're trying to do is build a social relationship with these people. I saw a question come up out there with someone disagreeing with Zach about what your fans are talking about, how that lowers you on the trust scale. And this is, I think, where he was driving at, right? If you know somebody is truly a fan of something, that colors the way that you think about them. So if you go back, if you sort of think about what Zach said in this slide about the oil companies, the reaction that you have to what the senator says is very much different than the reaction that you have to what the advocate says, right? Those two examples crystallize what you feel about somebody. And they're both important in their own ways. So as you start to look through this, as you're doing your research, as you're listening, and as you're trying to reach new audiences, it's not as easy as just reacting to something that's out there. But it's really an active position where you're trying to get through and trying to look at all of this material and sort out who is in the conversation, how they can be looked at, how they can be engaged. Because if you just react, you may miss an opportunity to truthfully engage, because engagement implies that they care what you're saying and you care back. It's a two-way street. Next slide, please. So, and here also, I like to use this quote because I love the term social intelligence. Social intelligence will become a critical asset for C-level executives and board members seeking the best possible basis for their decision. That was from McKinsey. And social intelligence is just what I was talking about. So that's not reaction, that's not listening, that's true intelligence. You're looking at these opinions, you're looking at what's being said, you're trying to gain whatever insight you can out of them so that when you choose a pathway forward for engagement, when you're actually going to go and start talking to people, you know the lay of the land. You can't do that unless you put in the upfront work and you really take a look at who is saying what. And that requires social intelligence, not just listening. Next slide, please.
Having a little delay here.
Next slide, please. Are you having trouble with moving it again?
A little bit of a delay. Yeah. Hold on one second.
Well, as you're doing that, it's okay. As you're doing that, I'll keep talking, and then the slide will come up. So in the next slide, once Steve gets that going, we have a program life cycle as our demonstration of this. And really what you're trying to do in a program life cycle is you're trying to come up with a feedback loop that includes all of these things from a marketing perspective. So what I'm talking about is the research phase of this, right? Where you're looking at customer sentiment, you're looking at competition, you're looking at the industry trends, you're looking at public policy, you're trying to separate people out into buckets, who's for your brand, or your subject matter, who's against it, and all of this you're trying to bring together and put it into your planning, right? Because as you start to plan your marketing outreach, as you start to plan your engagement strategies, as you start to look at what your marketing messaging should be, this is really the input to that. In the past, Zach said you would go out and do all of these things in several different ways. Here you have everything that you need really online these days, right? You don't need to found focus groups and survey groups to do your initial research. It's all out there. All you have to do is look through it and find out who's saying what. Then you can decide to use traditional methods to drill down even more on what it is that you're finding. Because when you're planning, this is all going to shape your objectives, your strategy, the messaging, the channels that you're going to use, because not everything is Facebook friendly. Not everything is Twitter friendly. Some things need long form in order to explain. It's a complicated subject matter that needs long form. Or you're trying to use all of these channels together to get your message across, right? And then when you start looking at who's talking about you, those are the influencers. Those are the people who matter. Throughout all of this research, names and venues and other things are going to start popping up, and these are the people that you're going to find have a tendency to carry your message forward. And that may be the tendency to carry your message forward in a positive way, or the tendency to carry your message forward in a negative way. And those are the people that you want to engage. In fact, in a few future slides, you'll see this, and it's a subject matter that we've been talking about recently. If you take a look at the lay of the landscape, and you could go through and pull everything together, you'd find that the list of real influencers, depending on your subject matter, is a lot smaller than you think it is. And you'll also find that it's not the usual suspects. So from that, all of this stuff comes together to so that you can execute your plans, right? And then as you measure these, this is where the feedback loop closes, right? So you see how effective you were. If you were targeting certain objectives and you had a strategy and you had a list of influences and you knew what you were trying to do, then you've got to come up with ways to measure those to see if you were right, if what you did before and how you researched it really did feed into your plan, and if your plan, once you put it into effect, really did meet the objectives that you were trying to achieve. So this closes back on itself, right? Because you can use the exact same messages and the exact same listening skills and the exact same active software and platforms that you started your research with to find out if your plans were successful or not. Next slide, please. And by the way, measuring is always one of those things that you know that would be a webinar in and of itself, right? The correct way to measure this, because that's a very complicated subject. So social intelligence is more than just social media, right? What you're really talking about, again, is this accurate analysis, this web-wide perspective of what's going on. Don't just think of this as you know, Twitter or Facebook. This really involves everything. It's beyond social media. If you could follow the tracks like we can about what goes on, you'd find that still the predominant way that people get their messaging out is long form. Everybody's been trained now to think of Twitter as sort of this this expression mechanism. But if you really drill down and look at things, most of the time it's a conduit for disseminating information. So most of the time what you find is people passing links around, or people passing information around, or links to information, and the information tends to be made up of more long-term things. Also, don't forget that, you know, if you're looking at an article or you're looking at a blog post, and underneath it is a discussion forum, that's social too. It's not just Twitter. What's going on underneath that forum has unbelievable insights for you. So again, so as I'm saying, this includes everything, right? Everything out there on the web. If whatever solution you're using isn't looking at everything, you're missing vast swaths of what's ever out there. And that includes the ability sometimes for us to take a look at what's going on from an inside perspective versus what's going on from an outside perspective. So, for example, you may have an internal customer service system where what you're doing, you're great at looking at your KPIs, you're great at looking at are people being serviced on what, you know, do they get their questions answered? When you send them to an FAQ, do they go there? Do they tell other people about the FAQ? All of those certain things. But when you go, you have no idea how to connect those internal customers to the external world to see if they're tweeting bad things about you still, because the path that you've seen them following in your CRM system doesn't resemble what they're saying about you in the outside world. If you can't put those two halves together, you're missing a large part of the information now, and you ought to start thinking about that, because it's going to become more and more prevalent as we go forward. So right now, we personally process north of 5 billion articles, blogs, and posts. So I think that that's really the scale of this. There's a lot going on. Next slide, please. And since there's a lot going on, you need some way to rise this all to the top. Now, Zach made a very astute point. He said that a score isn't a number that you just tattoo on somebody's forehead and forget about it. And I couldn't agree with him more. The reason that we have scoring mechanisms in our system is not to tattoo a number on somebody's forehead, because honestly, that number doesn't mean anything if it's outside of the context of what it is that we're talking about, as Zach astutely noticed with the Joe Sixpack versus the Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett is not 100. Warren Buffett is 100 when you're talking about financial matters. But when you're talking about the Video Music Awards, Warren Buffett is a 0. Context is everything. And any system that does not take context into account is sort of giving you, again, only part of the story. So Here, we take a great pride in the complexity of how we do this, right? If you take a look at this slide, the first those three blue middle sections are really the bedrock basis for how we try and score somebody. We score them on their topic, their authority, and their reach. Topic meaning how often are they in this context, basically. Authority meaning how many other people cite this person within this context. And reach is sort of that raw catch-all. How many people does this person have the capacity to reach, right? And those are the traditional measures, and I think for some other products that are out there, that's really what you're getting. You're getting how many followers do they have, how many friends do they have. With us, of course, the other things that come into play here, how many readers do they have, where do they publish, what's the readership of the publications, what's the web traffic to the publications, all, sort of all in that nature. Once you've established those things about somebody, you can start to surface in the context you're looking at who might be influential in this context. And hanging off to the sides of this are two of the other subjects we've been talking about. One of them is sentiment, right? Because once you've identified this context, you can take a look at if somebody's positive or negative to the context. On the other side, there's a subject that we've been giving a lot of talks and webinars about recently, and that's resonance. And I sort of alluded to that in a past slide when I said resonance is really surfacing that number of people who actually are shown and demonstrated to pass on the information from within this context. They're the nodes in the system, the reliable nodes in your system. Again, how can you do that if you don't have context? If you don't know what lights up a network, if you don't know what subject matter gets all of these people excited, there's no way to really conceptualize how you should deal with them. Next slide, please. So when you're taking a look at all of this together, it sort of gives us sort of ways to look at things and map things out. So for us, one of the things that we try and do is produce mappings, and really one of the most interesting things that we have is something that sort of contrasts reach against topical relevancy and authority, right? Because that's the intersection of where everything goes here. Steve must be having trouble changing the slides again. That's really the crux of where everything goes here. What you're trying to do is find out who lies at the intersection of reach and topical relevancy and authority, because those two things are really the key to everything that we're doing. And the next slide, when Steve gets to it, is a map that shows you the intersection of those two things. What you're really interested in is how many people show up in that map and where they lie on the grid. There you go. So you're looking at a regular 2x2 matrix. What you're really interested in is that upper right-hand quadrant. That's the intersection of the high-value people. Next slide, please. And so another thing that falls out of what we do is this consolidated social profile. So when we give you somebody who shows up on a map like that, when we tell you who an influencer is, you get all of the information on that influencer all in one place. So you don't have to look in 16 different places. You don't have to wonder what they're doing. If you take a look at this presentation here, we're showing you every place that this person publishes. We're showing you all of their social media handles. We're showing you their regular publications. We're showing you a word cloud about what they talk about, their contexts. You can also take a look underneath. There are tabs here to show you where the author is articles and blogs, social media, and mentions. So we show you that the lists of everything that they've published broken out into articles and blogs and social media are on separate tabs. And also we show you every place where somebody has mentioned this particular author. So this allows you to take a look at one place, get their context, see what they're talking about, because different people, the same person, may talk about different things in different contexts. I know that's true for me. On Facebook, I talk about a lot of different subjects than I do when I'm tweeting or when I'm acting in a phishing capacity, as anybody knows, anybody who knows me can tell you, I'm very politically opinionated. I talk about cars a lot, things like that. But in official capacity, those aren't the subject matters that I talk about. This helps you to see all of the contexts for somebody in general in one place. Next slide, please. And this one is really, really important because here's what we're talking about with resonance. So really in this slide, what we're showing you is if you take a look at those bottom dot mappings in the left-hand side of this, very, very important. One mapping shows you all of the people who are the most responsible for passing a particular piece of content around or passing a particular subject matter around. The second one will show you where this particular piece of content has been passed around and where it appears the most. Then you'll get things like sentiment analysis out of it. You can see a graph showing you the bump in the bottom where this spike occurred in people talking about whatever it is. Perhaps you released a marketing statement. Here's everybody talking about it. Up above, most prevalent article that's been passed around. Or it could be tweet, or it could be a blog post. All of this stuff informs you about what's going on and really is what I mean by active listening. I don't understand how anybody is going to engage anybody without taking a look at something like this first, because this tells you exactly who got lit up by what it is you're talking about and how they got lit up and who they passed it to and who are the other people in the chain that also found this compelling and interesting. So this is really the key piece of it for me. When you're doing all of this analysis, you're trying to get to this, and you're trying to take a look at these people and say, when I go to engage them, now that I understand a little bit about what they like, how can I engage them in such a way that they'll further my message in a positive way? Next slide, please. A couple of case studies here for things that we've done, just to give you a clue. Beverage company came to us, and really this was a very, very strategic sort of an assignment. So what they really wanted us to do was take a look at consumer sentiment on public policy, tax regulations, diet, health, competition. It was very, very complicated. They were interested in all of their brands. They were interested in all of their products, and really what they were doing is they wanted it all boiled down to the last slide I showed you, basically. They wanted to know what words and phrases people used when they were talking about health risks for, say, for diet beverages, or talking about health risks and obesity for regular sugared beverages. They wanted to know the words, the phrases. They wanted to know which networks lit up when this was talked about. And because what they really wanted to do was craft advertising that used all of these words and phrases, and they could directly speak to some of these concerns, perhaps soften some of those concerns, and reach the people who were concerned about it in the right way. Very strategic, very successful, very complicated, but very, very smart. Next one. That's one example of what you can do. Here's an absolutely operational, everyday look at what you can do. Large bank, mortgage unit. What they're looking for is anything consumers say about their mortgage unit. And really what they're doing is they're looking at this in a very operational perspective. They want to know if people are complaining that applications are taking too long, or people aren't getting back to them, or things aren't happening. They want to really look at it on a geographic distribution level, because really what they're trying to do is identify kinks in their pipeline, right? Places perhaps where they're not, where the servicing is slow, where they can direct resources, and all of the other things that go with this. Very operationally focused. This is one query that we've had running for a very long time, and it works, right? It's not strategic, it's not big thought like the last one. It's extremely, extremely practical. And if somebody's having a problem, they reach out to them, they try to fix it, they engage with them, and try to make it right. Very proactive, very successful. Another way to take a look at it. Next slide, please. And the last one, crisis, right? So we all love a crisis because it's really when we get to spring into action. But we had an instance last year, Big Four audit firm came to us and said, oh my God, one of the presidential candidates, somebody just announced that they've stolen his tax returns. We're their auditors, help. So, so in this case, again, go back to that mapping, that slide that I showed you earlier, and start to think about what you have to do in order to get your message out there effectively. In a crisis condition like this, it's already out there and it's happening and you can't stop it. So forget about it. You can't stop it. This story blew up and there was no way this story was being stopped. It was going to get tweeted, Facebooked, passed around every single venue you can think of, discussed it in discussion forums, everything. No stopping this train. The only thing that you could do, which is smart, is take a look at the people who are most responsible for putting this around and make sure your denial gets in their hands so you can leverage the people who are actually responsible for doing the real-time spreading of this. And as long as you can get your side of the story out there, you can blunt the story. Very smart use of some of the things that I've showed you earlier, right? You can't stop it. So you might as well leverage what you can leverage out of it to get your side of the story out and blunt it. That's exactly what you should be doing and exactly what you can use software like ours to do. Of course, and what happened? They did get their side of the story out and it just died, right? It went nowhere. Good job. Next slide, please. Influencer identification. Here's another interesting one. We were doing a test for a pharmaceutical company on an arthritis drug, and we kept getting this knitting blog coming up in the Midwest. And and here's an example of where marketers sometimes scoff and say, "This must be a mistake. What's this doing on your reports? I can't figure this out. Blah blah blah. It's not one of our usual suspects. Your software stinks." And so we dug down on it and we said, "Now, hang on a second. Let us take a look at what's going on here." And as you might imagine, what happened on this knitting blog was it was primarily populated by women. It was primarily populated by women of a certain age who were sharing their tips on knitting and their patterns, and it was very popular. It was it's a very popular blog and very big. But what was also happening was, of course, because these women were older, a lot of them were having arthritis problems, and they would reach out to their friends on this blog and ask them about it and ask them for what they were doing and solutions and things. So not only was there some great stuff going on knitting, but there was a bunch of health concerns going on this thing. So when we actually drilled down on it and showed them all these conversations and showed them what was really happening, they were quite shocked, and they said, never in a million years would have we thought to reach out to some of these people or to make a post and say, hey, let us show you where you can get some information on this. Let us let us help you discover treatments and possibilities and drugs and all of these other things, not necessarily just for them either. Because here's another important part of what Zach was saying about trust, right? If somebody detected that somebody was posting to this blog forum just to shill for a drug company, it would be very, very bad. If somebody were detecting that people were going in there and pointing them to information and helping them and noticing what they were saying and helping them out, very, very good. So that's something about trust. So you've got to be very careful when you do this online, because if you seem too overt about something, nobody's really going to listen. This gave them an opportunity to share information at a venue that nobody would have ever thought to share it in, and it was very successful. Next slide. So, so this idea of social intelligence, remember, all the way up from strategy to engagement, right? You're trying to gain unique business insights. You're improving your campaign performance. You're trying to reach beyond the content creators to the content disseminators. And you're really looking at real-time situations once your plan has been executed, right? Once your plan has been executed, now you know in real time who you can reach, what you can say, what you should be looking at, who you should be looking at, and who you should be worried about. all of this really fits together into the idea of intelligence, which is far more than listening. So, somebody tweeted that listening was dead, and I agree with them. Listening is a bad term, right? I think intelligence is a much better term, because what you're trying to do is pull all of this together so you can draw conclusions and feed your marketing programs or your customer service programs or whatever it is that your objectives that you're trying to feed. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm pretty good, right? We've got 9 minutes left, according to my clock, for Zach and I to answer questions, which is exactly where I wanted to be. So I can't even believe I did that with all I had to say. So with that, I'll turn it back to Steve. And if there are any questions for Zach or I, please feel free to ask them. We're more than happy to answer.
Okay. There's one here for you, Mark. How can small business marketers best effectively use influencer marketing?
I'll start
So
with that one.
I think I come back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Zach. Go.
I'll start with this one, and this is Zach. It's very much still about context and about knowing, for a small business, your key influencers are even more narrow and even more constrained than they are for a large company, where lots and lots of people might be interested in what Oracle has to say or what General Motors has to say about a given new product launch. If you're a small business who, for example, owns restaurants in San Francisco, the number of influencers who are really writing content that you care about and people are paying attention to their point of view on restaurants in San Francisco might only be a dozen people total. And in some ways, that's a great opportunity for you as a small business, because if you can identify those 10, 12 people who matter to your brand, you don't actually have much of a disadvantage against a large business, because you can really work personally to handle that smaller group of influencers who you want to talk to.
I would totally agree. And I would also say that one of the things that you have going for you too, and this is where people I think fall down a lot, is this whole notion of not looking at it as a hard sell, right? Is taking those influencers and engaging them means providing them with content that's related to your small business, that's engaging, that allows them to interact, that allows you to burnish your image as a business. So, I put my money where my mouth is sometimes, because I've actually helped somebody locally with their small business marketing like this, and he's running a Facebook page, very small local business, and it has almost 3,000 active people who engage on his Facebook page. And the reason that happened is because the Facebook page is sort of like a salon. It's not about selling. It is about selling, but it's not. It's about information and pictures and content that people find engaging and react to, and in turn tell their friends about, which in turn exposes the business to more people than it otherwise would. So I think as a small business, you really have a chance to foster that in a much different way than a big business, as Zach mentioned, like GM or even Apple can possibly do. So I hope that answers your question. Got something else, Steve?
Yep. Here's one. Maybe to you first, Zach. I think this reflects on your slide about Warren Buffett and Joe Sixpack. Are you saying I should ignore or can ignore some of the people talking about my product or company in social media?
I don't know if ignore is the right phrase, whereas you want to know what they're saying, you want to track what they're saying. But especially as we talk about everything is a matter of limited resources and trade-offs, I may accept that I am, much like for customers, not going to satisfy every customer every time. I'm going to figure out who are the customers who are aligned with my brand and I want to do business with. You have a similar answer with influencers, where there are some categories of influencers who you're like, well, you're not very influential and you clearly are never going to come around to my line of thinking for this type of category. So I'm going to include you in some general marketing activities, but I'm not going to give you the personal attention, personal hand-holding, personal interactive experiences that I am going to give people who I think are more relevant for my audience or are more worthwhile for me to engage with.
And you know what? I'm going to totally agree with Zach, and I'm just going to drive this home with a really salient point that happened recently. So for those of you who know about this, think about what just happened at the VMAs, right? At the Video Music Awards with Miley Cyrus and all the controversy that was there. So let me ask you a really big question. If you're Viacom, do you care about what's going on the Twitter sphere at the macro level? Or is what you're really interested in what's going on in the Twitter sphere for the people who are your exact demographic that you're trying to cater to? So I think that's the way to think about this is, you know, there's a bunch of opinions that are being flogged around out there by a bunch of people who are not your customers. And I've had several blog posts on this recently. Go to our company blog and take a look at it because there's several mistakes there, right? All the way from Applebee's, who fired the exact demographic that was their customer, to an amusing story about Durex, to the Children's Place, right? What they were doing was, and it's a perfect example of reacting versus engaging. You know, if you do that, you're reacting to people who aren't your customers. What you want to do is engage the demographics who are your customers.
Okay. Final question for you, Mark. Question out there about what's the trust level in tools to perform sentiment analysis?
Ooh. Zach and I have a similar opinion on this. I'm sure he'd opine on this also. Sentiment analysis is really difficult the smaller the bite that you're looking at. So, you know, tweets are really, really hard to read, right? Because even if you use strong language, it's definitely not an indicator of negativity, right? It could be an indicator of something positive. And with abbreviations and hashtags and all the rest of it, irony is something that doesn't really translate well, right? So I will tell you that we've run experiments, and on the if you look, the longer form an article is, of course, the better you can grab sentiment out of it. The shorter form something is, the worse it is. But I'll tell you, if you aggregate things together, sort of what I showed you for some of the screens is, if you aggregate things together, you can actually tell with very high degree of accuracy whether the general trend is positive or negative. It's very accurate. But when you try to get down to very small levels, it becomes more and more fuzzy. So really what you're interested in, I think, when you're talking about sentiment is you sort of say, well, show me all of the things that, you know, is my campaign generating positive or negative, you know, sentiment, and then try to drill down on it to find out. For the most part, too, you also have to realize that most articles are written to be neutral, right? Nobody really wants to slam something in an article, right? So if you're getting a review, most of the time, I mean, if you look at somebody as storied as Walter Mossberg, most of the time, you know, he's pretty even-handed in what he says, right? Because that's what you're supposed to be. He definitely has preferences, but he's very even-handed. But tweets and Facebook posts, really, really difficult. Take a look at it in the aggregate and then drill down to find out what you are looking at. Would you agree, Zach?
Very much so. You really can't do very good automated sentiment analysis on Twitter. Well, it is certainly possible on blogs and long-form content.
Yeah, very difficult. You really should look at it in the aggregate.
Okay. Well, thanks, Zach. Thank you, Mark. This has been great. We're up against the end of the hour here. If I could get my machine to
just when we're having fun.
Yeah, start. Well, we can continue the conversation. If Mark and Zach, if you could both hang on and continue the conversation on Twitter, I think our audience would appreciate that. Looks like there's a fair amount of activity.
And again, I'd like to thank you all for joining, and there's been a great conversation on Twitter at both hashtag mBLASTLive, but also at Mark B. Hatch or at Zachary R.D., and glad to answer any questions for the rest of the day that come in there as well.
Terrific.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.